Welcome back to Studio Watchwolf. This is a video about Kings of War. I'm Latch.
And I'm Dean.
Dean and I have known each other for more than a decade, and we've been playing war games regularly together. I think it's fair to say that Dean is more hardcore than me, and when we met, I just started playing Warhammer 40,000, and Dean was playing that as well. But your main game was Warhammer Fantasy Battles about
Yes, it was. It was Warhammer Fantasy Battles, playing with the regular that you used to see around the shop.
Right, and my recollection was that these were the elite. These were the elite gamers, and it was kind of I didn't see it played in the evenings much. It was kind of a midweek afternoon thing where ne'er-do-well contractors who should have been fixing people, doing trade work in people's houses, had sneaked in for a couple of hours of Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And it was a great scene, and it was like, I would say there were the more mature players, when I say that I mean older, there were the older players.
I was about to say, there was nothing mature about us.
There was nothing mature about them. and it was a really good scene, and it was so I was sort of there painting up my Eldar, as I were.
Oh yeah, your Eldar.
Space elves. Space elves. And these guys, you know, they were good company. I suppose there is the sense that they're sort of a more mature player, but not, of course, in the
not in the traditional sense.
Not in the desirable sense.
At the end of the day, we were still grown men playing with toys.
Exactly,
but
with huge men. So, what better person to talk about Kings of War in the context of other war games than my friend Dean? So, what we're going to do today is talk about Kings of War as we understand it, in the context of all the other games we've played, and talk about some of the problems with the other games we've played, things that we like about the other games, and talk about what we think appeals to us about this. The truth of this is, I started playing Kings of War because I knew Tom liked it, and that is a good basis for playing games, but in the process of making these videos with him, I really got interested in playing the game, and just listening to him talking about the game in the first couple of videos that we did, I thought, I really like the sound of this. In the meantime, Dean's back here and we're in touch on the internet, and I said, started playing this game. Dean's watching my videos, studying, taking notes from the videos, as you do, and Dean's playing other games mainly. So we've got a context to talk about Kings of War as we come to it from other games, and talk about what we think about it.
Yeah.
If you go to Mantic, which you should, then you can book a tour of their premises, meet Tobias in their showroom,
meet him in the field,
and meet him in the field.
Yeah, meet him in the field,
and meet Ronnie Renton, the CEO, and he will talk your ear off. Wonderful man, and tell you all about his plans for all of his games, many of which there's no evidence of except in his mind at this point.
No. Right, okay.
And terrific, very interesting man. And one of the things that he and I really saw eye to eye on, and something we'll probably return to in these videos, is that he, like me, perhaps of an age, he's a bit younger than me, we're really interested in games where it's about the metagame that exists between the players. So the game is not the models on the table, it's not the rule book, it's what are you going to do and how can I outsmart you? So I think you're going to do this, so I'm going to try and play towards that, but it was a bluff, and then I discover that actually you're thundering down the centre and I'm dead. And so it's about me, and it was a phrase that we came up with. It's about knowing the other person, the metagame that exists between the players, rather than the metagame existing just in the list, where you've created a list, you wind up the list and put it on the table, and it just does its thing.
Yeah,
and we actually know what's going to happen before we started playing the game.
It's not like some armies where you can literally, like you say, you wind them up and let them go. Or like, no matter what you do, you can't possibly mess up because the army is telling you what to do.
Right.
Because if you go out of sequence with certain armies, they'll punish you for it because, you forgot to do like this spell, or you forgot to do this action first. But there are some game systems with some armies which go, you're going to, this event of sequence will happen.
It's actually planned in advance.
You can't mess this up because it is preordained that X, Y, and Z will happen.
If your opponent does this, you're going to do that. And the metagame between the players is lost. It's like, here's the best thing that an experienced gamer said about another experienced player. What Bobby Fischer said about Boris Spassky. Boris Spassky at this point was, 1972, was the undefeated, 8 times undefeated world chess champion. And what Bobby Fischer, who was famously an asshole, and what Fischer said about Spassky was incredibly respectful. He said, the thing about playing Boris is that when he made a move, I never knew if it were the deepest sacrifice or just a blunder. So the two best players in the early 70s, by a long way, when one of them, when the reigning world champion made a move, his challenger didn't know what the move was. He didn't know if it was a sacrifice or a mistake. And that's what we're really looking at. What we're really looking at is at the highest level of gaming between grown-ups, I'm going to say it, is you want a mature war game that supports both players trying to win, but the game exists between the two players. So you're both fiercely competing. And I do feel that I found this with this game, that it strikes me as a mature war game that's going to appeal to a more mature player. We're not so interested in dozens and dozens of tiny rules. I mean, literally, this is the entire Kings of War rulebook. It's printed at A5, but Dean learned the game in 20 minutes. I learned it by watching the video that I'd done with Tom, and literally just watching the video to edit it. When we threw down the pieces the following week, I knew how to play the game, and I didn't have to ask him anything about playing it. So it's a very simple game, but it's extremely complex, and the complexity exists between the players.
Simplicity doesn't mean that it's a simple game.
Exactly. Well, simple rules.
Yes.
Simple rules.
Simple rules. Yeah, like you're about to say, simple rules can have really complex interactions. Like going back to a more complex game would be like Parabellum's, Corvus Belli's Infinity.
Infinity is a good example. It's a complicated game.
It's a really complex game with lots of overlaying mechanics and everything like that, and it is a beautiful game that I still love to play. But the problem with it is it's incredibly complicated. The complexity comes from the complication of the rules. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, which level of martial arts has this guy got, and what does that mean in terms of making my move? Can he?
Yeah, it's intentionally meant to be like that, and that's what you sign up for when you join it.
Fernando Liste, who was a great host when I visited them in Spain, was very clear that he wanted it to be an incredibly crunchy game. And he's absolutely unapologetic about that. He wants a game that's incredibly complicated.
I agree.
But this game isn't like that.
Yeah. No, but that's what shouldn't apologise for making a crunchy game. That's completely fine. It's the way that it is. But that's just one aspect of a game. Another one would be something like you say, like Kings of War, which is not a particularly crunchy or complex game. It's very it's laid out in a way that anyone can pick it up and understand. Yeah. But that itself does not mean that it can't have crunchy aspects to it, because
there isn't. Let's define our terms.
Okay.
If we use the words as a mathematician would, I believe I'm correct to say, feel free to correct me, is when we say complication, when we say complicated, these words with big overlapping meaning, but they're very important to gamers.
True.
So you can use the words more or less interchangeably, but if you want to talk about sorts of complexity and sorts of complication, then their flavors of meaning are important and worthwhile. So when we say complicated, what we mean is more parts, specifically more moving parts. So chess has a relatively few number of rules. It is not a particularly complicated game. So the pieces all take another piece in the same way. There's only one exception. A pawn moves diagonally and normally to take a piece, and normally it moves forward. Yep. So the knight has its well-known knight move, which takes a little bit of learning.
It's an L shape. No matter which way you look at it, it's the L shape no matter which way you look at it.
But it still takes another piece by landing on its square and displacing it. Yeah. So this isn't complicated. So all of the difficulty in chess is the complexity that exists between the players.
I would say that Infinity, for its complexity, we're going to talk about that, look at it as being very much like a piece of clockwork. If you look at it as like a clockwork machine, it's got lots of moving components, being very small gears and stuff. It's got lots of things that you have to take into account to get to the final result of whatever that calculation may be.
Right.
Or something like
But
Kings
it's a
of War.
mechanical calculation, isn't it?
Well, Kings of War's mechanics would be equated to that very same machine, but larger gears. So it takes up the same space, but it is less rules overlap
That's
to
quite
it.
good, yeah. Larger wheels.
Yeah,
I've never heard that. That's quite a good one.
I made it up on the spot.
There you go.
But it makes it like that's what like you can fill out a foot-long like calculated machine, whatever it is, just filling out with gears. That all it's doing is turning. But how you get to that result of just the final wheel turning is either lots of small wheels or big wheels. So
Yes. Yeah. So all of this is, it's just a couple of, what it is, I'll tell you what this is, it's a couple of old friends bullshitting about Wargames.
Just rambling about
Wargames.
and dislike
and I think we have every right to, and hopefully there's a few of you out there who will agree with what we're saying, or disagree. And one of my strong beliefs is that we should disagree with one another, and that there should be no prohibition on disagreeing with one another, but we must do so tolerantly.
Everyone spends time and money doing this sort of stuff, and the whole point is to have fun. Who cares if that dice rolls off the table?
Exactly. Who cares if the dice rolls off the table?
The dice result is
what
still
we want is a way of resolving whether the dices that roll off the table are legitimate or not. Here at Fistful of Dice in Southsea, I was very interested when I visited last year that they had this way of playing, which is if a dice rolls off the designated area, they shout at it. What do you say? What do you say if you don't want it?
Oh, but it just comes down to when you roll it. If you don't see the result and it's wrong, you can just, if you shout keep,
you keep
the result, and that's it.
You've
locked it. It doesn't matter what you've rolled, you've locked the result.
It's an excellent way of resolving stray dice. I mean, I think you want to. Basically, what you want to do is specify the things that can't be changed and specify the things that can change. So you can say, any dice must be rolled on the green baize tabletop to be legal, unless, and then you specify your unless. To us as fairly experienced wargamers, I probably don't play as much as you, but I think we've both done our years of wargaming, and
I've been through the trenches of many game systems. You weren't there for the days of Warhammer Fantasy.
No, well, actually, I did. No, I did play Warhammer Fantasy. I played Wood Elves, and so I had sort of hundreds of tiny trees on a tray. And the thing with Warhammer Fantasy is you take the units off, you pluck the units off as the unit. And the problem with that was that you tried to pick one off, and they're all tangled up with the others. So you tried to take one off, and you got three, and then you tried to put them back, and then they all fell over.
Yeah, that's not often a problem that Dryads had. I remember we Dryads because their arms were like going everywhere, and they had branches. So you pick up one, and you have like a daisy chain of the unit going up.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so we've both been through the trenches with it, and what we thought about crushing strength was, you may like to correct us if we're wrong, that what that does is there are two rolls. Three, I suppose. You roll once to hit your opponent. So the attacking player does all the dice rolls. You roll to hit your opponent's unit, and then with those dice that hit, you roll again to do damage to them. And as many of those dice hit, you score that number of damage onto the unit. Now, crushing strength modifies the to damage, and it basically just gives you a plus N. Let's say crushing strength 1 gives you a +1 to damage. So that means for every hit that you've made in the first roll, you're more likely to do damage in the second roll.
Yeah.
And the word for that is killy.
Yeah, punch face good.
It's more killy. So when you look at these rules, so again, it's the thing I really like about the Kings of War rules. It's quite transparent. Is the dreaded martial arts in Infinity has that problem of, like, what exactly does this mean in my playing of the level? What does it mean to this situation now? So, whereas it's very, very obvious.
Quickly, just going back to the way that the interactions work with Kings of War, I actually, at first, was a little bit weirded out by the idea of that whoever's attacking the unit rolls everything for them. And I have to admit, That has been the most nerve-wracking I've been for an intro game in my life. Is having my opponent go, oh, I've rolled to hit, and then I've rolled to wound. Oh, do I roll the same? No, you don't roll anything.
You don't get to roll.
you don't roll anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to dictate how much I hit, how much I've killed, and then if you're off the board or not. And it's just like, you
have no agency.
I feel I'm helpless to watch my men get murdered.
That's right.
I'm just exactly like, I'm literally watching.
That's
just
the
like,
way we like it.
It was such a weird concept, but I really liked the whole idea of just like, no, you're not in control here.
One of the things that this gives you is a way of doing timed games, because anybody who plays competitive chess knows you're playing on the clock. I mean, my usual chess partner, Takanori, who's been in some of these videos, I won't play him unless we're on the clock, and we use the clock to handicap one another, which is every time he beats me, which is the first 3 games, he gives me 1 minute on the clock. So he loses a minute and I gain a minute, and that
changes a lot.
And that allows me more time to think and him less time to think, and that's a way of handicapping the game. Now, Kings of War will allows you to use a game timer. Chess clock is what you're going to use, and because you're doing all the rolls, it means that it's viable. So you're in charge of everything that happens in your turn. So if you want, if you're trying to make this, trying to get your position, your unit exactly positioned.
I didn't even think about that. You're completely right. I didn't even think about it, because the classic thing when it comes to like competitive tournament play is to drag out the time. If you're losing a game, you drag out the time, because you just go, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do with my unit home and heart. Yeah, but because all you're doing is you're handicapping yourself, because once again you have all the power in your turn.
It's your time.
Yeah,
that you're running out of.
Like you could sit there in like, I don't know, like 40k and hum and heart whether or not you're going to move a unit to shoot that unit, and then they're going to roll. And you go, oh, I don't know, they've got a 2-up save. Oh, this, that, and the other. It doesn't matter, because you know exactly how the interaction's going to go, and all you're doing is you're delaying everything that you intend to do, because all the power is in your hands of moving the unit, attacking, rolling your opponent's saves.
So what we're really saying here, to sort of try and draw this to a conclusion somewhat, is that in our experience of other games, the problems exist in the games because of very complicated rules, which means a lot of rules, and where we're saying complexity is taken to mean the complicatedness that arises from the interaction of these things, and we gave Infinity as an example that was very complicated, deliberately so. The directors want it to be a very crunchy game, and we're not against that. We're not crunch prejudiced, are we?
No, at all.
But this gives rise to problems between the players, especially where, in the case of Corvus Belli, they didn't, as a policy, as a company, they didn't want to specify. They just wanted to write the rule book, and they just wanted to put it out there and let the players do with it as they would. So this was problematic. And what we're talking about here with Kings of War, I think it's fair to say, is this looks a game that's Dean is almost entirely new to it, and I'm still very much a beginner. And what we see in the game is that there seems to be a simple set of rules that really allows the 2 players to play against one another. And as old wargaming buddies, we really like that. That's what we want to get some beer and a big bowl of pretzels and a lot of dice.
Yeah, as a rule system, it is something that has definitely got me interested. I know that a lot of different rule systems trying to get me interested, but this has been a rule system that I've played in the intro game yesterday, and already I'm looking at a couple of different factions, looking at the model ranges for, looking at potentially, because of the way that you don't take models off, because you have your little...
we could build a diorama.
Yeah, exactly, make like little diorama units.
So what we would say about Infinity, and I think you'd agree with me here, Dean, is that an aspect of the game is, aside from these fabulous models, beautiful models, and this terrific setting of like about 200 years in the future. So it's something that we can easily relate to.
That cyberpunk dystopian future, which
corporates running the world, proxy wars by your special forces groups, just marvelous stuff. And they've got this great setting, and the game is very, very complicated. So the stat lines are themselves have many attributes, but the rules for the attributes are themselves often very complicated. By complicated, again, what we mean is there's a lot in it. And then you've got all of the complexity arising from the interactions. And into this, what we have is Spaniards who like playing not just role-playing games, but who like doing live-action role-playing games, and who like dressing up in suits of armour, real suits of armour, and bashing each other with swords in, what's that called? Medieval reenactment. So these guys, Fernando and Alberto, these guys that I met, the directors of the company, are really into reenactment, really into the whole thing.
I had no idea they were into that.
But so they're very into their role-playing games, and this feeds into one of the issues with Infinity is, so these guys speak a Romance language, Spanish, which is to say that the language is less specific than, say, a Germanic language, which is very specific indeed. So broadly, linguists may wish to make more of this, but they're saying things in quite a loose and way, and that's fine for their RPGs. So they had an RPG when they were creating the Infinity universe. They created a role-playing game in which they could develop stories and narratives and create the characters from it.
That's often the birth of a lot of wargaming systems, honestly.
Right. Is it?
Go back to...
I thought they were unique in that.
No, go back to Games Workshop when it was just Citadel Miniatures, and you'll find that there used to be a company that made models not only for Dungeons & Dragons, but also for other various sci-fis, and that's how they ended up birthing Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer Fantasy Battles.
Right.
Was actually
I didn't know it came from an RPG. So that's what they were doing too. So the thing about this is that they've written this rule book, and just as with their RPGs, they expect people to be interpreting the rules and playing it as they wish. It's a loose set of rules. This is really what they've done with a very complicated tabletop miniatures game in Infinity. And when, 5 or 6 years ago now, probably as early as 2016, I think, one of the features of Infinity is that as you move your pieces further towards one another across the board, the parallax error grows and your ability to be accurate with placing the miniature diminishes. So the nearer it is to me, the more...
100%. The further you get, the higher the risk is, because you're starting to lose...
more and more uncertain.
Yeah, you're starting to lose perspective of who can see what.
Right. So what was happening was that there were a group of players who didn't want their dudesman to die. That's really what's happening. So they only want to put their guy in a position if they know it's not going to die. And there is an aspect of the rules which means that because of geometry, there's a very, very tiny band into which you can pop your mini... Here's a building. Here's a building. You can pop your mini out of the side of the building, and you can see the opponent, but the opponent can't see you because of the way the rules are written. And that's fine, but it's very, very small. And as the game progresses, both of the players are going to move into the centre of the table and be less and less able to judge what their distance is. Now, this is completely in keeping with the directors who created the game. They want this exciting, I think it's a very Spanish, ballsy way of playing. It's a macho style of playing, which is the farther and farther you get away from yourself, the less and less sure you are of whether that's going to be safe.
At the end of the day, when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter what wargaming it is, or even like a skirmish game system being Infinity, Kings of War, Warhammer 40,000, anything like that. People are going to die. Right. Not in real life, obviously, but people in games are going to die, and that's literally...
I don't know. Sometimes I've had a really bad game.
Oh no, we died.
Where's the helpline?
But like, that's the harsh reality of it. You can't have a game which is just like, oh, here's we'll go with like Infinity, and like, oh, it's action packed, and here's my ninja that's going to do this, and we're going to do this, that, and the other. Here's my knight. And apparently everyone gets in a lot of fights, lots of shots are fired, and everyone's fine. That's
it's not the A-team. Yeah, tabletop miniatures games aren't the A-team.
Like, even in action movies, people die all the time. Like,
right.
Even if it's not the main characters, everyone else is dying.
Right.
And if
that's something that you find upsetting, and so if you're anxious about that, and why not? If you've spent 3 months beautifully painting a miniature, and you're anxious about him dying, perhaps because you just love it because you've been painting it, perhaps you've given it names, Dean. Perhaps you've named all your miniatures.
My coveted naming of all of my stuff.
So, it's understandable that there's an attachment to the mini, and we get that. I'm rather attached to my war dollies, and if you're worried about them dying, and especially in a game like Infinity where there's only going to be a dozen of them, perhaps a dozen and a half at most, then and it's critical. So as your number of minis is reduced, so your agency in the game is reduced because you have less orders to spend. Most of your units will be generating orders, which means the ability to do things. And as you get less and less guys, now you have less and less means to affect your strategy.
But making mistakes doesn't make you a bad player.
But
making mistakes will only make you a better player. So if you move a guy out and they get killed and you lose less orders, it will make you a better player because the more you play, the more you not only realize the basic functionality of that, but also you understand more about how to properly position your
right. But if you've got this, so if it's a very complicated game and the large part of the strategy is built into how you've built the army list, then the problem is that if somebody kills one of your key units, then now your strategy has been it's deleterious to your strategy.
I can't deny that. But just what you were talking about before, about people being hesitant to move models around, and as people die, your order pool gets less and less. I completely agree with that, and that's how the game works. But in every game system, simply losing guys or having the risk of losing guys doesn't justify throwing your toys out the pram.
Well, no, but essentially there's a group of players who don't want to take that risk, and they find a way of interpreting the rules that says, if I move my guy out of the edge of the building, will you be able to see it or not? And the rules are explicit in saying that that's not part of the game. But they wanted it to be part of the game, so that was making the game more cerebral, more cooperative. So you have to tell me, will my guy die, or will you get a shot at my guy? It's just, will you get a shot at my guy if I move it out? So in that way, the game gets more cooperative, and you could make a case for saying, well, now the game is more cerebral, where I'm very clearly planning what's happening. But it made it, to my mind, a lot less ballsy, a lot less Spanish. I think it was a detraction from the quality of the game.
Any game system, not just Infinity, but any game system where you're turning it from being me versus you into a competitive thing of, can your guy see my guy to do X interaction? It makes the game, it just sounds really weird to say, but it makes the game less flat. It makes it flaccid because it becomes more
intellectual. It becomes more intellectual. It becomes less visceral. It's less exciting.
Yeah,
you don't know. And the point of their game was these are guys who are sort of very physically active people. They love the science fiction and fantasy. And they dress up in suits of armor and whack each other doing this medieval reenactment. I'm
not going to lie.
So these are guys who are very used to combative, confrontational situations. They love it, and they love the fact that their unit is now farther away and you're less able to judge whether you can get a shot and your opponent can't. But there were players in the community, and they were very vocal. It was really a minority of the community, but they were very vocal, and they wanted this rule. And myself and my buddy Mike came into this situation, and we read the rules and just went, well, that's not right, is it? What we didn't realise was there were an organised faction of players who were determined to make it right.
Right.
So there was some, I think it's fair to say there was some trouble.
I'm pretty sure this is the reason what prompted you to actually go to the people who made the rules.
That's right. So I was, I think, back here at the time. So I was back in the south coast of England and back here in Portsmouth, and we were playing the game here, and we were talking about this thing. And because I was much closer to Spain, I rang them up and said, can I come over and can you explain this to me? And they said, okay then. So I got on a plane, flew to where they are, which is in Cangas, or Porto Vigo, on the border of Spain and Portugal, and they're very proud of their town, and they should be. And they showed me around the town, and they showed me the nearby cities. Had a wonderful time, wonderful weekend, and they showed me how to play the game. And essentially, our reading of the rules was correct. It is what it says it is. It is not this made-up interpretation which is called play by intent. And the very fact that you've got another rule, the very fact that you've got a title for it, which isn't in the rule book, should give you a clue that it's not a rule in the rule book. But this is the way these guys wanted to play, and it's essentially, if I move my war dolly to here, can you shoot at it or not? Because I don't want my war dolly to die. And so this was the way they wanted to play. So I had the rules explained to me by the directors and by the man who is Alberto Arbal, who has written the rule books since the game began. They're on the 4th edition now. He's written all the rule books. He talked it through with me. The directors talked it through with me. Fernando Liste, who is their general manager, was very angry about people playing He doesn't mind people playing play by intent, but he very clearly minded people telling other people that they had to play their way.
This is the rule.
And he banged his hand on the table and said, "There's only one way to play my game." And my issue with the directors is, well, why don't you just say that then? Why don't you just write a paragraph on the website saying, let us clarify this page of moving and measuring. Yeah. That's all you have to do. Now, they didn't do it. What we did do was they gave me permission to make a video, and we had Alberto in the video, and we just used my iPhone. And when we published that video, one of the men from the Japanese group that were hostilely telling everybody they had to play this game wrote on the YouTube, "That's not how to play the game. This has been explained before." I will put this into, there's a link to the video, and I'll put a slide of his quote, and you can see that for yourself. And the point of this is, John Joe, in seeing the game explained to him by the man who had written all the rule books for more than 15 years, said to that man, "That's not how the game is played. This has been explained." In other words,
you're wrong, I'm right. Yeah.
The person the directors that have invented the game and created the game and know exactly how the game should be played and how they intended the game to be played, and the man who had written all the rule books is wrong, and we're right, and you better play our way or else. And what I found as the game went on was, as many people like my friend Dean and many of the great people here at the shop who I've enjoyed playing the game with, and people that I met all around the world, I met some great people and really enjoyed that game. The problem is the game also attracted these people, this very hostile element that wanted it to be the way it was. And to my mind, you're up against a certain sort of personality. That's really what we're talking about. And there's a certain sort of person who made their way into that game. I think they exist in most games, but then...
Every game system will have someone like that.
Right.
The classic, the rules lawyer.
Well, sort of. In this case, they're rules lawyers who insist that it's played in a way that is incorrect.
I experienced it before with, I want to say, 7th edition Warhammer TK.
So what we say, these guys are rules lawyers. Is that that's your phrase?
So So what happened was,
but in this case, it's a willful misinterpretation that they're rules lawyers.
Well, it was really not. So back in the day, with psychic powers having different disciplines, I don't know, like there are some generations that have no idea what that means because obviously 40k has changed, but there were different psychic disciplines, much like there were different schools of magic for Warhammer Fantasy. And each spell had its own clarification, and one of them was a Witchfire, which is just a direct damage spell. And there was one spell in the entire game which didn't do that, because the rules for it were just like, oh, you always have to roll to hit. But then people were ignoring the very last little bit which said, unless otherwise, in which case you follow what it says. And Psychic Shriek at the time was a Witchfire that said, you don't roll as normal, roll 3 dice. If you go over the opponent's leadership, they take that much damage.
Right.
But so many people were just ignoring it and being like, oh, do you roll to 1 dice to hit with it and then resolve it? Or do you roll the 3d6 and then the difference?
There were people to whom it wasn't straightforward.
I had a straight up argument with someone once over it, and it was just like, that's not how it goes. And someone was just like, oh no, it is, like the rules are like this. And it's like, but this
what about this clause
these 3 sentences at the very end of it say, unless otherwise specified, follow the instructions. So
we've come from these other games, and what we think is that Dean after exactly 1 game, and me after maybe a dozen games with a more experienced player. So Dean doesn't have the advantage of that I have, which is a more experienced player to teach him, in my case, not very experienced. But what we find is it's a simple game, and that the complexity of the game exists between the players. So the meta game is between the players rather than in the rule book or in the army list. And we both think this is something that's interesting for us.
Yeah, I agree.
So I hope that was an interesting chat about how we see Kings of War and the problems with other games. And join us again. Join us again for more Kings of War stuff. And we're going to be talking about... Dean's going to have a look through some of the models that he's interested in and some of the factions. So we're going to have a talk about that. So that's it from us for today. Please join us again. Bye-bye.
Bye.